Hey guys, welcome to the Gunshot with me, John. Today we're going to be having a quick look at general licenses and a quick update of what's happened. The overarching theme over the last 7 weeks is not a lot has happened. The 3 general licenses, 04, 05 and 06 were revoked. We were then given 3, one for carrion crows, one for pigeons and one for Canada geese. And then defra, in a big move, went and took that away from Natural and said, we'll sort it. And then obviously we had some political things happen, and Michael Gove, the head of defra, wants now to be Prime Minister, so obviously he's going to be less focused on this and more focused on something else. The first real update is this. Last Friday, defra gave an update saying, we are taking everything into account and we're doing something. What they're going to do, there's no dates set out, they really didn't say anything useful. However, it was an update, at least they said something, at least they said, look, we're on it. It would have been nice if they were actually on it and give us some dates and some times and some things. At this point, it would have made a lot more sense in my head if we had left it with Natural England to produce lots of these and then sort it out thereafter. But then, maybe not. The second update is this. The 10th of June, which was yesterday, Wild Justice decided to release a new legal challenge. Not content with having had 04, 05, 06 taken away, they have decided that GL26 is not fit for purpose in their eyes, and sent a nice legal letter to defra outlining lots of very scary big words saying, I would like you to stop or I'm going to take you to court and it's going to cost you a lot of money. That is kind of the overriding thing here. Their biggest issue is this: game birds, insofar that they say that the word kept here is not used legally. So, on GL26, which is the general license to kill or take carrion crows to prevent serious damage to livestock, including poultry and reared game birds, it says this license can only be used to prevent serious damage to the following types of livestock: sheep, piglets, poultry, and, most importantly, reared game birds and wildfowl, including released birds whilst they are kept. Their definitions here are what Wild Justice have an issue with, and these are firstly that livestock includes any animal which is kept for the provision of food, wool, skins, fur, for the purpose of its use in carrying on of any agricultural activity, or for the provision of or improvement of shooting or fishing. And then it says the term kept is not defined in the 1981 Act. For the purposes of this license, animals that are either physically constrained, e.g. within fences or a pen, or which are unconstrained but remain significantly dependent on people, are kept. For example, where a game bird remains in close proximity to a released pen and will often return to it for shelter or to roost at night, and is dependent on food put out by the gamekeeper, then it is maybe regarded as livestock, even if it is free living. Makes sense, right? Yes, it's a little bit backwards, but you can protect your pheasants, because, in my eyes, pheasants aren't always kept. They are always dependent on a keeper for food. I mean, a gamekeeper, it keeps the pheasants. I mean, it's in the name of the job description, really. But they are dependent on that keeper for food, and if a keeper is doing a good job, they will always be in fairly close proximity to the release pen. So, this is where Wild Justice pipe up and say, actually, we think that that is wrong. And in a statement from Mark Avery, he says, but we are now asking for the elements of GL26 which relate to the protection of pheasants and other game birds to be quashed, and those elements which relate to other livestock to be thoroughly scrutinised in the review of general licence promised by defra. So this brings us to this legal challenge, dated the 7th of June, however they only released it, they sent it on Monday. I have read through this, and it was really very, very hard. Like anything legal, there's just a lot of repetitions and a lot of confusion. There's a few things that are worth mentioning. This, Wild Justice is not here specifically seeking the withdrawal of the remainder of GL26 or of GL31 or GL28, but does invite Natural England to reflect on the legality of any licences issued relating to the subject matter in 2020 or beyond. Please accept this letter as a formal letter before action is required by the CPR pre-action protocol governing claims for judicial review. This may give rise to judicial review proceedings. As a consequence, we are writing this letter to give you the chance to respond to the relevant issues, including explaining any disagreement you have with the factual or legal situation as we explain it here, in the hope of avoiding litigation. Essentially, this is a, we're going to sue you if you don't do what we want, which is kind of similar to what they sent before. This whole document then goes on to state that they do not think that this is legal as per the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 and as per anything else. which essentially means they want it rewritten, but they want pheasants taken out of it because they don't see them as livestock, because they think that this whole kept thing that we say for pheasants shouldn't count. Their other issue that they go into a little bit later on is that they do not think that the document GL26 here gives enough explanation of satisfactory reasons to not use alternative methods. If you read some of the alternative methods in here, they are a little bit like GL31, a little bit amusing, a little bit unthought through, certainly haven't been done by people on the ground. But they say that it isn't adequate to say that the person isn't satisfied. There should be a legal outline for satisfaction. In their own words, they say, put the other way around, Natural England has specified that lethal methods are lawful if the person doing the killing thinks that there is no alternative non-lethal method in their particular circumstances. But Natural England has not addressed its mind to the question of alternatives in that particular situation. I mean, who knows what they want you to do? Capture it and move it somewhere else, more likely make it someone else's problem. But generally speaking, we can prove very quickly that non-lethal methods do not work. Birds are very, very clever, especially crows, so it would be a full-time job to put off a crow, or it's a very quick job to put down a crow. Essentially, they are just making our lives quite hard. There's some irony that actually it's these reasons that our side also think that this is an unworkable document, because it's a little bit too grey. What we should be saying, and what these guys have clearly noted, is that actually it allows us to carry on about our business quite well, this GL26, certainly for a lot of the reasons that we would shoot crows. However, obviously that grey area they've picked up on, they do not want that grey area to exist. Anyway, so that's enough of that. If you would like to read this, it is obviously fully available online, and the same as GL26. If you haven't read it yet, please do so. What this leads us on actually is to Sporting Gun had an interview with Mark Avery. If you haven't seen or read this yet, do so. It is actually immensely, immensely useful. Sporting Gun, as we all know, is one of the most popular shooting mags out there, and they luckily got an interview with Mark Avery. It's a very interesting thing, and I would love to read it all out to you, but please go and read it yourself, and we're just going to take some bits from it. Sporting Gun asks, your letter takes issue with the legal interpretation of kept, and that many birds that are currently regarded as being so are in fact wild, and therefore not kept. How would you apply this interpretation to other livestock in view of Lee Day's definition of free living? Especially with regard to, say, hefted sheep in Cumbria, and how does that differ in your view from how pheasants are kept? Their question here is saying that, so hill sheep, when they just go up onto the hill and then are hefted back, they're hefted so they know where to come home to, they are entirely free range. Being entirely free range, a bit like a pheasant, how do they differ legally? Because really, they don't, do they? Mark Avery replies, not quite. We think that Natural England has gone out on a limb with an unlawful definition of kept. This is the difficulty, isn't it? It's a huge difference opinion of what kept is. I would say that pheasants are kept purely based on the fact that you pay someone to look after them, hence they are kept. But anyway, we've never heard anyone claim that a pheasant in a field or running about on a road causing accidents is livestock because it might nip back for a couple of pecks of grain now and again. If your sheep is in my garden, then I can probably have a good guess at who owns it and phone you up. If your pheasant is in my garden, how do I complain to you about your livestock eating my vegetables? If it's livestock, then we believe that the owner is responsible for it. Did Natural England dream this up on their own, or were they pressured into by shooting interests? And whichever it was this really a good idea? I guess what they really like is for us to compartmentalise our sort of pheasants and go, well, they've got to be your pheasants. Please ring all of your pheasants and so on and so forth. I think maybe that the system of pheasant shooting is a little bit too old or a little bit too unconfined for them. Who knows? However, a pheasant is kept. They are looked after. They have someone who's paid to look after them. That's just the way that it is. Because they're free range, that's just the way we do things. If we had a different shooting culture, we'd be doing tower shoots too. You keep them in a pen and then just go chuck them out of a box on the shoot day. But we don't do that. In fact, we give them a better life for our traditional way of shooting. But they obviously see issue with that. And as much as we're going to go on to another thing, it's very clear that actually what they want is no shooting. Or at least no shooting in the modern way of doing things. Sporting Gun goes on to ask, do you think your challenge will help focus Natural England and clarify matters for people who shoot to enable them to carry on doing so, or is your ultimate goal to outlaw all shooting for game boards for sport? To which Mark Avery comes out with a response that can only be as political as possible whilst being such a clear lie. We aren't trying to outlaw all shooting of game birds for sport, and if we were, this would be a very torturous route. I think actually this is probably the most intelligent route they could take. It's such a backhanded route that actually nobody would see it as such, so they're not going to be sort of vilified as such. And maybe even I stupidly thought, actually, you know what, maybe they do just want a little bit of extra control. Maybe they just want a little bit of extra regulation. And a little bit of extra regulation, self-regulation, wouldn't be a bad thing for us to count what we shoot, where we shoot, and how we shoot, and actually build a national record of exactly what we're doing. Because one has to be accountable nowadays. It turns out that's not what they want at all. And in fact, what they want is they want a essentially their way or no way for our countryside. They want a communist rule of the countryside that says we're going to manage it how we want, and that's the only way that it can work, even though their way has no tried or tested ways. In fact, it is tried and tested and proved to be quite bad to manage wildlife in the way that they say wildlife should be managed. Anyway, let's go on. We are pretty sure that game shooting will continue for a very, very long time. Of course it will, because that's just the way it is. But we do think shooting needs to be better conducted in many regards. Recreational shooting of wildlife has not done a good job through self-regulation, and we want Natural England to do its job in acting as a fair but firm regulator. See, I deny that. I think that we do a fairly good job of self-regulation. I think there are a few shoots out there that perhaps don't adhere to correct guidelines, and they really should be vilified by all of us. However, without decent self-regulation there, I can see what they are talking about. We should self-regulate. There should be a body, BASC perhaps, who says, tell you what, you are not operating inside of acceptable guidelines for this day and age. You're releasing birds late in the season, your stocking densities are way too high, and as such, you're doing bad for us. Anyway, let's move on. Lead shot should be replaced by non-toxic ammunition. Stocking densities in release areas should be reduced to levels of good practices suggested by the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. I agree with one of those statements. Illegal persecution of birds of prey should cease, 100%. Nobody in the shooting world condones the illegal shooting of birds of prey. However, what we would like to see is a general licence given for them, or individual licences handed out better for the control of buzzards where the population densities are too high, red kites now where the population densities are too high, to keep the countryside in balance. The numbers of released game birds should be greatly reduced, and lethal control of native predators should be directed at the appropriate species, to which they would say is just foxes. Certainly not jays, jackdaws, rooks and magpies, by appropriate means. These are the things that we often hear sensible shooters say, but we'll see little progress on the ground. And if they all happen tomorrow, then shooting would still be happening. Well, yeah, they would. We'd still be out shooting birds, but less birds with steel shot. However, if you're not allowed to control a lot of the species that they are quite ardently against controlling, all wild bird shooting would stop. Or at least it would be almost impossible to go out and shoot just more than one or two, because yes, we do create an artificial environment where game birds thrive, but that's how money and conservation get into the large portion of the countryside that they do. Essentially, they're just trying to make our lives very difficult. So as much as they want to ban shooting, they would like to see one man going out with a gun and shooting one pheasant and coming home going, look what I did. I saw 15 crows and 800 magpies and no songbirds, but I saw one pheasant, so I shot it. That's the countryside that they have in mind quite clearly. But I did shoot it with steel. Hell, I'm going to continue reading this because it is just such good stuff and really worth supporting Sporting Gun for being able to go and do things like this. In Wild Justice's latest legal challenge to Natural England, it focused on the rearing of game, particularly pheasants. You seem to be targeting the shooting community by singling out a small section of society, shooters. Is this a cynical divide and conquer tactic? Mark Avery responds, we feel shooting is very unregulated, whereas farming is quite strongly regulated. Shooting is very regulated. I would like to see more self-regulation, as I've just said, but let's move on. There are things we don't like about the licenses already published and the parts of them that relate to farming, but we feel that these could probably be addressed through a review and consultation. It was presumably Natural England's decision to link game rearing and sheep and piglets together in one licence. This may be because of the extreme pressure on Natural England from shooting interests. As I've outlined, shooting interests generally are the ones that actually fund conservation on the ground. And as such, we are the ones who actually want to go and use these licenses to control population numbers, to keep a balance in nature. Natural England don't actually mention any evidence that carrion crows are a problem for game during the period before they are released. They are for wild birds, and it's not about the period before they're released, as much as if you read GL26, it allows you to do it for preventative damage. If you have seen crows taking poults, which many of you will, you'll understand that actually shooting a crow that's living in a release pen or around a release pen the week before you put poults in is a damn good indication, if you've seen it happen years past, that you're going to want to go and do it again before you put your birds in the wood. A consequence is that the GL26 is under scrutiny from us for a variety of reasons. You are right to identify the fact that the interests of farming and shooting may not always and exactly coincide. Quite regularly not. Keepers and farmers don't get on a lot of the time, because a gamekeeper's ideal farm and a farmer's ideal farm are very different if you drew them in a beautiful picture. Sporting gun. Through your challenges of the general licenses, what do you want to achieve? Is it biodiversity or something else? Mark Avery responds, we want public bodies to implement the laws protecting wildlife properly. There it is a fundamental part of nature conservation, but also of the legal system. It would appear that, if you actually look at Wild Justice's motto, essentially it is sorting out conservation through the legal system. So essentially what they're doing is sending scary letters to people, trying to change the law to make life harder, as opposed to actually going and doing anything directly about conservation. They are literally just trying to sort out legislation for their ends. It does feel like we should have something very similar to Wild Justice, a group that is just there for legal action, nothing else. Essentially to counter these things, because this is quite scary. Certainly from my perspective, reading through it, you can see why now we're in the situation we're in. I shall continue. Mark Avery says, shooting and farming interests exert massive pressure on the likes of Natural England. It's because that's their regulatory body, so that's who they have to go to ask permission for lots of things. That is exactly why they're there. If we didn't exert pressure on Natural England, we wouldn't be doing anything. That's just the way it is. In an attempt to get their way with things, and they don't always have wildlife at the front of their minds. Well, not usually, no. However, because what we do on a daily basis as keepers, shooters, farmers, that is what shapes the world around us. So actually allowing us to do things that benefit the bigger picture, that's it. If we were completely self-interested, as I've said, the landscape would look completely different to how it does now. For example, if a landscape was just for shooting, we'd be taking a step back 100 odd years. There'd be no birds of prey. In fact, there'd be literally nothing. Literally nothing apart from game birds. But that's not what you see nowadays. If a landscape was for farming, it would just be a farm. It would be a big field, a set of fields. Probably not even hedgerows, because that's just going to take diesel cutting them. So you have to look at this more pragmatically, but they don't. It's my favourite sentence from the whole thing. Carrion crows can't speak up for themselves, and we are very happy to take up their cases for them. I was taught a long time ago that you can't argue with an idiot, and when somebody is quite clearly as set as this, and quite clearly as bent as this on getting their aim, there's very little we could do to ever communicate with these people. Our point. It's all well and good controlling the countryside through legislation, but it's an awful lot better actually controlling it by going out and doing something. And that is what most shooters do or are involved in by some way. Even if it's you go and buy a shoot day, you are investing your money in feeding birds. And if you think feed just goes out to pheasants, it doesn't. It's going out to crops, protection, belts, conservation, all sorts of good stuff comes through shooting. Our countryside looks like it does because of shooting, and as such our biodiversity is the way it is because of shooting. You go to other countries, you'll see that do not have our game shooting heritage, where agricultural land is good, there is nothing. There is so unbelievably little, and we are so blessed that we have this patchwork of shooting ground with agricultural ground that these guys should be focused on other things. Anyway, he signs off this entire letter by saying, you know, we're kind of doing what we're doing, but we have taken legal advice about beaver culls in Scotland. These guys like fluffy animals, they like all animals, but they don't see our position in the ecosystem. Our position is as managers. We must manage and control these things. And all of these generalists that they love so much, jays, jackdaws, rook, magpies and crows, they do harm wildlife. There's video evidence of it exclusively. They say that that's just nature, but it's not just nature, because we are making it very easy for them and very hard for everything else because of the way that we have formed the world. That's pretty much me wrapped up here, although I could go on about this for a long time. Please go and support Sporting Gun. The ability to get interviews like this is good, and we need people like Sporting Gun to go and get them. Please read the general licenses if you have not done so. The more educated you are about these issues, the better ambassador you will be for shooting. The better arguments you can put forward, the more people will understand our cause, certainly. There's no point sitting there and ranting about it on Facebook without actually being able to form a decent argument, understanding what has happened clearly, and converting other people. Infighting and in-whinging will get us absolutely nowhere. And in fact, it's exactly, pretty much in my head, what these guys want. Keep your eyes on them, and we shall see where this goes. If you'd like to know Basque and NGO's opinions on them, we've had them both down for podcasts. Go check out the podcast in the description below. You can find them on Spotify, iTunes. Go and check them out. It's very interesting information. And if you'd like to support the channel, please go to the website in the link below. Check out our mugs. Bye-bye.